Welcome back to our special birthday edition of Online Education Across the Atlantic. As I know most people are celebrating Neil's birthday. By the time this gets published, you'll have missed it by a day or two. But happy birthday, Neil, as you, I don't know what birthdays count for in these ages.
Yeah, I mean, it's really great to be entering my 30s. I've been looking forward to that for a while. So,
I was
um,
about to ask
I'll
if you were legal to drink yet.
if you guys can remember that, period.
That's a good one. There's a
Oh,
good one. And
yeah, well,
for
that
the
was
record,
during the Truman administration, so that was a while back.
well, you've got some Johnson electoral signs on your back wall, so you're set up for that. And for the record, no, I don't well remember 30s anyway.
Must have been a good decade then.
It must have been a good decade. So it's great to see you. Morgan and I just got back from the ASU+GSV Summit. And so we're going to take the opportunity today to sort of cover that. And there's another opportunity in the US where we do have occasional news items going on. But for the past week and a half, it's all been about tariffs, which are not directly about education. So this gives us a chance to jump right into the ASU Summit and have that conversation, and I guess allow you to virtually join the conference after the fact.
Look, I mean, the question that everyone wants to know the answer to is, did you get a seat at the bar? I mean, this is the
Oh,
question, right?
that was a headline of the conference. They had one ASU GSV, the first one after the pandemic, and there were so few people you could sit at the bar, impromptu meetings. Other than that, this was the first one in maybe 6 or 7 years where you could just wander in and get a seat at the bar. And it was wonderful. Did you go in there at all for any meetings, Morgan?
Not after our meeting on Sunday, yeah, but I
Yeah,
count
Sunday didn't
Sunday.
quite count.
Oh, jeepers, okay.
No, but I'm just saying there were fewer people at the conference. But yes, and that, all right, so that actually gets to an interesting point. Yes, you absolutely could find a seat at the bar. I went in to watch the basketball game on Monday night. So if you're thinking Final Four basketball game, conference, and you're able to actually get to the bar in the evening, that said something was different. And on one hand, they did a much better job this year of setting up extra tables and chairs everywhere to enable impromptu meetings, because that's the real challenge. But I strongly suspect that there were a lot of no-shows as well, given the budget situations, particularly with the universities.
Yeah, we know of at least one university which was going to come and everything, but decided not to, so.
Yeah, but just given the general crowding, I would not be surprised if some, like, because they sent out an email ahead of time, said 8,000 people, record attendance coming up. There might have been that many people registered, but I strongly suspect there were 10, 20% no-shows because of the higher ed budget situation. So their loss was our gain.
Although, even though there were many more chairs and fewer people, I still have been walking around my house this morning, just randomly sitting on a chair because it's available.
Taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
Did you put on your badge so that you felt like
Yeah.
walking around?
Yes. I was actually up at a meeting on the 32nd floor, and somebody who we all know, who in fact may have been responsible for us knowing each other, didn't have his badge on, and they were going to escort him out of the building.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I did have one meeting where they kept the person locked out of the entire hotel. And so we had to have our meeting standing outside in the front courtyard. Um, but part of that was Secretary of Education Linda McMahon spoke at the Tuesday breakfast. This is a couple days after the weekend protest, the hands-off protest, and they had a decent-sized crowd in San Diego. And there was going to be a protest during Secretary McMahon's talk. And so I give ASU GSV credit. They've really hired a lot of extra security, even to the point I was out going for a walk, 6:45. They wouldn't let me back into the hotel unless I could show a key and prove that I was staying there. And then they were stationed by every door, by every elevator. They had security everywhere. Of course, the protest because I was looking down on it from my room, I think there were about 20 people there. think that they did an excellent job of really making sure that none of that was going to cause a problem. So those were, see all the excitement that you missed, Neil?
I know I've had so many people in the past few weeks in the lead up saying, "Are you going? You should really go." So I've been quite grumpy about it because you don't want to be reminded that you're not going to something that you want to go to.
Yeah. And we should mention, Morgan mentioned a key point, Rajay Nayak from Skilled Education. I don't know if you remember, Neil, but he's the one that introduced us several years ago. So basically, I called him the podcast godfather. He created this podcast. I don't know if you remember that.
Do you know what? I do not remember that, but I was speaking to Rajay recently, and this didn't come up. So no, I hadn't twigged on that. But yeah, there we
Well,
go.
it was ASU GSV, and maybe it actually sort of speaks to how some of these conferences work. I was meeting with him. He was asking me, this is years ago, about if we're just U.S. Or not, and I said no. We do market analysis, includes global, but in particular Europe, Australia. And I was just talking to him, and he said, "Oh, you need to. Do you know Neil Mosley?" And he said, "You guys should definitely meet sometime." So that's when I reached out to you. We credit him now as the godfather of this podcast.
The Podfather.
I hadn't appreciated the whole backstory, so that's good to know. But yeah,
You just
good
expect
on
people
Rajay.
randomly reach out to you all the time. So
Well, I just thought you'd already know who I am, to be honest, Phil.
so it was interesting. So overall vibe, I mean, it was a good show. The show has become the must attend, at least for U.S. based analysts, vendors, and leaders within the higher education space, and it remains that. But there are some signs you have to watch out for, and the actual quality of the sessions this year was not what I didn't have very many where I said, "Oh, that session was great."
I had far fewer this year. Yeah.
Was that due to the themes? What would you attribute that to? I mean, be
That's
polite,
a
but
loaded question. Morgan, why don't you start off with some of your observations?
One thing is that there were many more corporate sessions. And so, some of those obviously were popular, like there was a long line to get into one of the Google sessions, always, so that I didn't even make it into there. But that sort of dominated the program, and I think it was a bit much. The conference for me was a story of disjunctures. Like there were things going on that people weren't talking about, and I think that contributed to some of the fact that the sessions weren't quite what I wanted them to be. Things seem to be operating at a level of superficiality in a way, without getting into some real nitty-gritty, which is something that I've really enjoyed in the past at ASU GSV. You really learn some good details and some ugly details often, which is really useful.
We need examples.
yeah, what was it that was not spoken about? That was my question.
Okay. So there were two disjunctures for me. One, nobody was talking about the current situation in the US in higher education and how we were going to think about it. There were some sessions where that was discussed. So Phil had a session that was actually like, I swear there was many people outside the door trying to get in as people inside. So people were sitting on the floor and hanging by the light fixtures and everything. There was another one by the Chronicle where they just said, okay, we were going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about this. We're going to talk about what's going on right now. And, obviously Linda McMahon was there and Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia and things. But in the main sessions, nobody talked about it. And I'm all for compartmentalization and denial, but like at a certain point we need to actually do it. The other issue was also AI. I mean, AI was all over the schedule, but all the conversations about AI seemed to be very superficial to me. Nobody was sort of really getting into the nitty-gritty of it, and you could find the nitty-gritty of it along the sides. And I came across a couple of vendors, or was reminded of a couple of vendors that are doing great things and had some great conversations. But the sessions themselves are all about, oh, we need to prepare our students, we need literacy, we need ethics, and never sort of got beyond that very superficial level.
All right. So now that we've got the Reader's Digest version, we're going to need to dive into that, both of those a little bit deeper, because I think they're great observations. And on the first one, the disjuncture, that wasn't the word you used in San Diego. I think you're making yourself sound much nicer right now. But
Well, yeah.
I think there was denial. There were a few other terms that I heard that may or may not have come from you. But so what we covered on the podcast, where I sort of covered what I had presented in DC. What happened was that DC conference about what to expect next on the Trump administration, how to understand it, and some crucial things that are so obvious but are not being dealt with, such as ex- expect step two. Trump is a deal maker. That's what he does. Elon Musk cuts too far and then pulls back. So expect step two. Just that type of thing and other things I covered. Um, I did an abbreviated version of that at the conference along with John Katzman with Noodle. It was his sponsored session. And that's the one that Morgan was talking about. Other than the rafters, you weren't really exaggerating. I'm glad the fire marshal wasn't there, because there were people pushing past and sitting around the side. It was more than standing room. And they told me there were about 50 people they blocked out of coming in. The most amusing story is we had seen Brian Napak, who's chairman of the board, executive chairman for 2U, and he was planning on coming to the session, which was sponsored and run by Noodle. Well, Brian Napak was one of the people that they wouldn't let him in. So I found some amusement in that. And it was a great conversation, tremendous interest. I mean, there's a hunger to talk about these real issues. That's what I attribute this to, and that's what our session was about. It allowed people to say, "Well, what about this?" and what should we? It wasn't like organizing, what should we do, but help us understand. But the reason I mentioned that gets to Morgan's point. I think there is a really strong desire to deal with the nitty gritty, the dirty, what situation are we in? And you just didn't see it throughout the conference. And then Morgan and I were talking, keep sharing our conversations. I said, well, you got to be fair that all the sessions were defined before the inauguration, so they just didn't have time to put them in. But your point was, I'll let you make your point again.
And so a lot of the sessions are panels, which can be really nice, but it also gives them the freedom to actually extemporize a little bit. So, you know, they could have actually updated it, because now it's now, April, so we know some of the contours of that. Um, and there's not many issues where the current events don't have an impact. So for example, student success or online learning or things like that. How is the situation going to change now because of things? Because universities are cutting back in terms of budget. There are new rules and so on. So, even though the schedule was set, there was an opportunity. Or you could have done what the Chronicle did and say, we're going to talk about this. Here, come talk to us later if you still want to know, but we're going to talk about this other thing because it's more critical. So I think there was some opportunity to actually make something really relevant, instead of, often I was sitting in sessions not hearing anything new because like the denial was so strong.
I'm interested, Phil, because your session was kind of about trying to navigate and understand, what's happening and what might happen in the future. I'm just interested to understand whether Linda McMahon's session added more light and detail to that, or changed the way that you thought about something, or
All right, let me answer and let Morgan answer. We'll have different answers, I suspect. Well, first of all, couldn't get into the session to see Linda McMahon, and I'll compliment ASU+GSV again, another improvement. There were so many people in the main session. They did live streaming this year that wasn't just live streaming. You could go to YouTube and you could even back up and see what you missed. And when I realized the line was too long, and I knew the audio where they were simulcasting it down the hall was pretty poor, I went up to my room and watched it. So I'm giving ASU+GSV credit that they really did a lot to address some of the problems of the past. Things are too big. Having said that, there was a good interview. Whoever the woman doing the interview was, I give her a lot of credit that she did ask some tough questions. I don't think she did any follow up questions, which I wish she had done, like say, hey, you didn't answer this. All right, with that whole setup, nothing. Nothing was new that she said. I think she is a very natural speaker and seems very like she's not just going to talking points. Of course, she had her talking points, but she really addressed the questions and she articulated the vision that very closely aligned with what I've been hearing in backroom discussions. So that wasn't new. It was refreshing to hear it straight from her mouth. Um, and let me give my biggest criticism. There were a couple things, such as the first question was about you talk about distributing decision making to the states. Well, what happens with states that don't prioritize access and using Title I funds to meet certain student needs? Linda McMahon answered that in terms of local. They know better how to run things than bureaucrats in DC. I get that point. But that wasn't the question. I was wishing the interviewer would have said, all right, thanks for that answer. Now will you answer my question? That's what I would have done. Anything new? The only thing new, she was very direct where they asked about the IES cuts, the part of the Department of Ed that does the data collection. And so Linda McMahon talked about that and very specifically talked about NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is the most high profile in the K-12 area. And she once again committed, no, we're doing this. But she also talked about, but we need to make changes. So right now we do it every other year at grades 4 and 8. Maybe there's a different approach. We need to change it. So she put herself very much on the record that we will keep doing this. She specifically addressed the changes and even gave some hints on what they might be, but she also acknowledged we don't know the details yet. That to me is important because that's what we should be tracking. It's not just, did you have layoffs? It's like, okay, are you meeting what you're supposed to do? So if they don't put it out on time, you can go back to this. So to me, that's, if there's anything that changed, it's just more elaboration on the cuts to the data group and on record, her being very clear about we're not cutting this. So nothing changed. I guess I'm listening to myself answer you, and I guess my answer is no. It was good to hear, but no, nothing changed. Morgan?
No. I think it's sort of like in some ways sort of. I mean, it felt like trying to calm some of the storm in a way, like, oh, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine, as opposed to fanning the flames a bit. So, um, but nothing substantially changed. Yeah.
I'm also interested as well. I guess this is the kind of context of government kind of decision making and policy creating turmoil in higher education. But I'm just interested in the nature of the discussion around the turmoil that's created in the financial markets and how that relates to investors, to edtech, and that kind of ecosystem, and whether that came through much at the conference.
No, that was part of that disjuncture. Like there wasn't enough of that. Like we needed to really talk about that.
Well, you heard it in the hallways, but
Yeah.
but also people haven't had time on the markets. Keep in mind that was a week old and people hadn't had time to digest it, but that wasn't talked about in the sessions at all. Actual budget cuts and anti-DEI. Hey, I brought up DEI and the anti-Semitism. I don't know. The Chronicle, I'm guessing they did over in that session, but
not really. I don't remember that.
Okay. Well, I just can't stress enough. There's a hunger to actually deal with this on a productive level, and it just wasn't there. So I guess the answer to your question is no. That the financial market implications wasn't discussed one bit in the sessions.
I mean, I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because even from this side of the pond, it's just fatiguing the sheer extent of what's happening and the speed in which it's happening and the consequences and the unintended consequences and the uncertainty that it's very challenging, isn't it, to navigate all of that and to think about it. And I find myself increasingly always interested, but increasingly just cognitively fatigued by just everything. And I'm assuming that other people feel the same as well.
That's
Yeah,
part of the strategy. No, it
yeah,
really is.
no,
There's a shock and awe nature of what's happening right now. And this gets to the other point that we talked on the pod. Well, it gets to the step two in the negotiating style. The intent is, and I honestly don't view this necessarily as a negative. I think it's power negotiation. For me, it's like, damn it, we should recognize it. But people not just react to the news of the day, but that's the point, is to get everybody reacting, getting fatigued. And then it's not behind the scenes, but the more important stuff people aren't focusing on, partially because they're too fatigued. But I guess yes, that's an issue, but we need to recognize that's part of the negotiating style. That's not just random.
yeah. And it feels to me, I don't know, maybe this is unfair, but it feels to me that when I think about universities over here, I think they're less anchored as institutions. They're more likely to be blown off track by a whole range of things that's happening externally, or to be a bit more brittle around that kind of thing than saying, this is what we're about, this is what we're doing, this is our strategy, this is how we're going to go forward. And obviously, the things that we're talking about are major things. But I think as a sector, um, wonder how kind of rooted sometimes universities are when things external to them blow up. So it feels like there's a um, particular challenge because of, generalizing, but that
Yeah.
feels to be the nature of things.
I'll throw in just a simplistic additional note that I haven't fully thought through, but just to react to that. The more elite the school is in the US, the more selective their admissions is, the greater that is an impact right now. It is the elites that are hair on fire, missing the mission, not thinking about what is our mission, but simply reacting. But you have to be fair. There's a lot of community colleges. There's a lot of mostly online schools, some regional publics, not all, who actually I do think are um, focusing on mission, not overreacting per se, trying to figure out what do we need to do. But it's almost, the more rational you are, it's almost the more underground that conversation. It's like I'm hearing that in hallway conversations, in private meetings. So there's sort of a correlation with how elite you are.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely, because a big part of it right now is the double whammy of funding cuts, through grant funding and things, and then just federal cuts which are being aimed directly at more elite institutions. Um, and so they certainly are feeling the brunt of that right now. So the others are sort of more in a wait and see kind of mode. But I think the the economy will start to affect them sort of as well. So, it's just a matter of time before they start. But they are sort of taking more of a wait and see rather than and then, on top of that, you've got the fact that not everybody on the campus is marching to the same tune. Like a lot of them are facing, you know, faculty anger as well. So you've got this sort of like internal and external conflict and crisis to deal with.
I'm interested as well, just to come back to some of those things that I get the kind of culture war element of this, and I think in our previous government we had that relative to universities, but one of the other kind of narratives that was kind of more on the kind of anti-higher education side of things was how well they serve the economy and how well they bring students through. We're going to help the workforce, and our previous government had a big push around kind of apprenticeships and other technical kind of qualifications. I guess I'm just interested in whether part of the narrative that's challenging universities, if I can put it like that, is also to do with that, and whether the government's exploring alternatives or pushing alternatives, or
Well, the interesting thing is, this is all right. In a functional country, there's a real opportunity right now. Both sides have that perspective. Both sides are concerned about the value that universities are providing. In my opinion, there's too much emphasis on workforce and economic outcomes, but that's a separate subject. Um, so there's actually mutual agreement on the question that you asked about, and we need to deal with it. But we're in a moment right now where due to multiple things, cultural war, the Trump administration methods and stuff like that, people are protesting against they agree on the problem, but they won't even talk about the solution. You're evil for even thinking about that solution. So I think there's agreement on the value of education and it needs to be improved. Of course, there's some status quo providers saying there's nothing to see, we're fine. But the conferences I go to and the crowds that I talk to on both sides are saying the same thing on the problem, but we're not in a healthy space of, okay, what do you do? What do you do about it? And I was going to add one other point. I don't think everything is about the federal government on this clashing level. I've written about Chico State University in California, but there's also Sonoma State in California. That's the school that actually cut their athletic department, and they're having budget and enrollment crisis. And the biggest driver there is enrollment and the state budget. They're going to get cut significantly in California. And I'm not trying to say they're doing perfect moves, but Sonoma State is really addressing the problem, saying we've got to become sustainable. Our mission is not athletics. We got to focus here. They're exploring shared services with other campuses. They're trying, and they are getting crucified by faculty groups right now.
I know another institution in a different state where the same sort of dynamic is happening. The leadership are actually trying to grapple with the issues, and they're getting pressure from the state government, and the faculty are crucifying them.
Yeah. So the point is that dynamic that Morgan mentioned is happening a lot right now. I think it's more a grappling with existential issues. In this case, I think the federal government's just sort of sometimes can become a proxy war because you already have these tensions underneath there that are happening. And it makes it difficult because schools, particularly regional public universities, and small private universities, they need to grapple with tough decisions. But it's not just let's make tough choices and see if it works. It's let's make tough choices and see if I even keep my job for the next 2 months as president.
Yeah, and certainly I mean, for similar reasons or different reasons, that's certainly something I think we're going to be increasingly grappling with, the fact that universities have to make really tough choices. And I think there's already something out, I haven't read it yet, from the Office for Students here around the potential for kind of future strike action. I think there's going to be a lot of that about coming up, I think, just because of the difficult situations the universities find themselves in.
Absolutely.
I do think we need to talk about the AI stuff.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Let's shift over to Morgan's second point. So before ASU+GSV, they have the AI show. That's a new show that's sort of a sister conference, free registration in the convention center, not in the hotel. Walking through, seeing the vendors, you had the big tech vendors, not Apple, because Siri got the directions wrong, probably showed up in Seattle instead of San Diego. But you had some big tech vendors in the middle. But if you walk around, a lot of it was just, it's a tutor, it's a chatbot with a very thin wrapper to say, it's an education. This is a teaching assistant. And it was, okay, that's fine, but that's so shallow. That's when I hear you say superficial, that's what I think of. And I'd say a third of the booths were like that. A third of the booths were general edtech, where they had AI thrown up on the logo somehow, or on the board. But if you really look, what do you provide? AI was not the enabling technology at all. It just was hey, this is people are talking about AI. I want a booth there so I can talk to them. So there was okay, that's just edtech, nothing exciting there. And there were a couple that were interesting. So basically nothing meaningful from the booths which is the main part of the AI show, that I saw. Good for them doing it, but I didn't really see anything exciting at all. And this should be the exciting, the new ideas, the VC funded startups doing something different, and it's not there. Now, over in the main ASU+GSV show, there were one or two examples, and I'll mention one, but I know that Morgan talked to other people. There was one, HeyGen, and they're doing basically translation. The idea is to take live video, and then if you want to translate it to a different language, it'll do it in your voice of whatever the video was. But not only that, it'll change the video so that your mouth is matching the different language. So it's a much more modern idea. That, to me, is quite significant for two reasons. One is it expands access to non-native language opportunities for education providers, the better you can do it, in a much more cost-effective way. The other thing is it gives you the ability to refresh or update your content. Hey, a year later, I need to tweak a few things to make it more appropriate, and it can enable that whole process. So to me, that is potentially transformative. But what exemplified the issue is, and I don't know if HeyGen's listening to this podcast, they kept wanting to show me the avatar. They also have this avatar that you can create speaking in this voice that matches what you were saying. And I'm like, avatars, come on. That's so cutesy. I'm not saying nobody wants to use it, but it's secondary. It's like you have something with potential. Take lectures, take educational content from real video and broaden the access in a much better way. But I don't even think HeyGen realizes that's a much more transformative part of what they do. And they kept wanting to show me the avatar, which I think was not as important.
Yeah, I'm going to butt in before Morgan has her turn, because that kind of marries up with something that I saw recently, which I think is super interesting, which is a university in Germany called Tomorrow University, where they've essentially launched AI-powered, they call them AI-powered multilingual degree programs, which kind of speak to what you're talking about, the ability, you know, it's not just an English program or a German program. They're actually using AI for that, and I think, I'm not sure if they're a fully online university, but they certainly have a lot of online stuff. And I think that's, you know, there's a lot of news, isn't there? There's a lot of hype, but the stuff like that really cuts through for me because it's really interesting and powerful. But not seeing a lot of it, but that was something that came on my radar, and it kind of chimes with what you're saying.
Yeah,
but
definitely have to check them out.
Yeah.
I'll do that tomorrow. So
yeah.
Yeah, like, so, even in terms of the kinds of things that folks were exhibiting at the AI show, there was a lot of academic integrity, which I'm very tired of. But again, there was this disjuncture, because I had a fascinating conversation with some folks who weren't exhibiting, like Roger Larson from Norvalid and so on, about how the whole, there has been a shift in the way we think about the future of academic integrity is not observing people taking exams and things like that. It's got to go in some different kinds of direction. And, he has a solution, but other people also have other solutions, so perhaps we need to rethink how we think about that and approach it in a different way. But the kinds of solutions we were seeing there were very old school, perhaps lower cost or something, but sort of lower school.
Actually, let me throw in one comment and then let you keep going. I moderated a panel that was on AI moonshots. It was sponsored by Western Governors University, and the provost of Western Governors, she was one of the panelists. And her phrase was, so they're funding a moonshot idea with AI, and that very low cost, expansive access. But they're specifically making the point is they know that most of the work right now is polishing the same rock with AI. And that's where, when you say
there's a lot of polishing the same rock.
Yeah, there's a lot of polishing the same rock. So they're going out of their way to say, no, blue sky thinking, moonshot, I'm going to force people to think differently of what might happen 5 or 10 years from now. And I thought that was really important. And you're glad that you have a university like Western Governors that's putting money into trying to figure that out.
Yes, and then, in the presentation, I went to some of the sessions and things like that, which were difficult to hear because like they were divided up and very thin walls. So that was a problem. But there was a hunger to find things out. Like there were a couple of sessions about some of these big universities that are either working with OpenAI or with Anthropic to, license the technology for the campuses, and nobody actually had any real strategy. It was, yeah, we're going to do it and give people access. And in the Anthropic session, the Anthropic person actually said to the audience, which of you on a campus actually have an AI strategy that you understand, or is, and one guy put up his hand. So there is a hunger there, but nobody's sort of addressing it. But yeah, the other big sort of theme in the show was sort of career tech. And I think there is, and somebody else pointed this out, which is that there is a bit of a gap. Like there's a lot of focus on teaching and learning, on things like academic integrity, on polishing the same rock, but some of those back office things are really missing from the conversation. And historically, those are the things where things have really advanced. And efficiency is not a sexy topic sometimes, but it's a really necessary topic, and it's a way forward, and that was sort of missing. But I came across examples of it actually at the conference, but just not in the show.
Yeah, you and I should not run a conference because we'll be pushing for back office innovations and some boring things.
There'll be plenty of room at the bar at your conferences, I think.
That is true. And we might even be there ourselves. But actually, that to a degree ties into the question about the current economic climate not being addressed. Because one of the other things that's happened, we've written about the way the interest rates and the investment climate is really impacting edtech vendors, but also the cost of universities. And that's leading to so many things. But we're not talking about it. And it sort of goes with what you're saying here. I don't want to imply, oh, AI back office efficiency will solve the other thing. It's more of these are tougher, boring topics that are very meaningful that are not getting addressed to the level that they need to be. Now, we might be wonks in wanting to talk about it and should never be able to run our own conference, but it needs to be discussed. Tell Neil about the MyDocs, because that
Yeah,
to me is interesting. Another example.
I think Phil probably found this guy totally by accident, but we came across a guy who's the guy who originally developed the company that later became Parchment, and he has another startup where he's automating transcript evaluation. So I actually saw a demo of it, and it kind of blew my socks off, to be frank. So he had a Chinese uh, transcript, a Vietnamese transcript, and an American transcript, and he just would drag and drop them, and boom, they would be translated and evaluated in the sense of like they would have a capacity to work out what the GPA was and to translate. They would be in the same format, so it was a very easy evaluation. That's the sort of thing that really can get to helping student success and those sort of things. Last year one of the things we came across was DOOWI, DOOWI, which is a way of really democratizing access to data, that sort of thing. Another example without a solution was I spoke to a somebody in the marketing space, the online marketing space, and he was saying he's under tremendous pressure over the next couple of years. He needs to radically reduce the cost of marketing, and he needs to use AI to do that because otherwise he's not going to be in business. And I think we need to solve those problems.
Yeah, I mean, and that's music to my ears because those are the kinds of things that I think are so neglected in this discussion, and they're the sort of things that the underlying foundations of universities and some of the frustrating, laboursome processes and issues that can get sorted. I mean, our government here seems to be keen to position AI as a solution to those kind of things, even though I don't have a lot of confidence in them to kind of implement them. But I think it's so interesting, all of the AI debate, because you've got this kind of really devolved technology in a way. You've got loads of students using ChatGPT, and you've got I still struggle to see, look, what is the impact on teaching and learning in a demonstrable way that's not us stressing about academic integrity. And I feel like we're always having this conversation. And that's not to say that nothing is happening, but even the examples of the big companies working with universities. I think Anthropic announced they're working with LSE, and I'm not wishing to be disparaging about LSE, but these companies often go to the big brand universities, and actually, there's part of me that sometimes think actually you might get more bang for your buck in terms of the use of this going somewhere else, frankly. But there's that kind of brand association that makes that complicated. But yeah, it's still frustrating, and I'm with Morgan. I mean, AI literacy and academic integrity are on my kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, anti-bingo card of AI. I'm just like, I'm over it.
Actually, you mentioned something I wouldn't mind picking up on. Well, first of all, let me go back to the My Docs example, and I just want to put a phrase to what Morgan was describing. This is one of the things that AI is great at, taking unstructured information and structuring it without the massive manpower, woman power of doing it manually and doing it repeatedly. So I look at that. It's not just it's fascinating to see. It's oh, you're building on the strength of AI. So that, I think there's a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, and where my mind goes, I mean, it's not a massive discussion over here, but because of potential funding changes, there's this talk about kind of facilitating credit transfer between institutions and kind of marrying those things up. I haven't seen anything, unless I've missed it, around the way that AI might help that in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, there are solutions out there, but you're not finding them in the mainstream kind of conversation. Instead, you get a lot of this sort of like very, like you saw a lot of use of AI for content creation, and I'm unwowed by that. It's mostly very minor kinds of putting a bad interaction in there, in a way.
Yeah, or just very unnuanced arguments. If I hear another argument that is essentially, if AI can do this, why should students be able to do it? I mean, gosh, can we get a bit more sophisticated than that?
So I want to pick up on another thing, and it gets to another topic here that we're not really hitting yet, but I have a newsletter poster 5 that's in my head, and I've been playing around with it ever since the Google AI and Education Summit that I went to in the fall. And it's the difference between big tech and edtech. And that's part of what we're seeing. We keep referencing it. Oh, big booths. Google had the longest lines, even worse than bigger than ours, trying to get into our room. And there's a lot of interest, but you're talking about Meta, you're talking about Google. You had to sign up with Meta to see some of those demos, Anthropic doing this news. The nature of big tech is not just that they're bigger and that they have the bigger booths and the more interest. The nature of big, and I'm picking it up because of LSE example. You said a bang for their buck. They're not looking for a bang for their buck. Big tech is doing what they're doing regardless. And their view of education is, hey, you can advise us on what we're already doing and you can come along for the ride. And we would love to have the halo that you provide. But they're doing what they're doing. They are not sitting out there in a capitalist mindset of what's their problem? How am I going to be able to serve that problem and make a profit doing so? That's not their mindset.
Product market fit is not something that keeps them up at night.
No, I mean, and it's the PR vanity of it that I'm complaining about, because it's those things that come to the surface rather than the things that might be happening that are genuinely interesting and are genuinely having an impact. So I think there's duality to my kind of issue with that kind of thing.
So my point is they're picking LSE because LSE is well known and they want that halo and they PR vanity. Neil's a little bit spicy on his birthday, by the way.
Yeah.
You notice that, Morgan? Yep. But in any case, that's what they're looking for. But the thing that's challenging is they're the ones that have the greatest opportunity to make true innovation. I mean, look at Notebook LM with Google. Tell me something that's better than that in terms of, wow, that makes you rethink how you could create content in a variety of formats. But they're not looking for product market fit. They're they're moving along. So that doesn't mean they have no impact, but I'm trying to point out it's a very different nature of working with big tech than it is with any of the other ed tech.
Yeah, and I don't know whether this applies, but I think when kind of post pandemic or during the pandemic, even just taking something like video conferencing and things like Teams, you can kind of see how there's a lack of fit there because it's so much workforce orientated that it doesn't kind of align as closely with education. I think that's another little flavor of the kind of big tech clash with education as well, particularly around kind of productivity. They're not sort of necessarily thinking it from a teaching and learning perspective, but from a kind of business, and sort of hacking that into education a little bit.
Yep. Well, this is great because this post that's been rattling in my brain for so long, I think the transcript in this example might finally get me to start putting it down on where it goes.
Yeah. Look, whatever you do, Phil, I don't want to see an action figure of you posted on LinkedIn. I just want to put that out there to finish this podcast.
Studio Ghibli is okay, just not an action figure.
Yeah.
So with that, we will see or hear people or talk to people in a couple weeks. And thanks a lot.